3 years ago, in the distant land of Philadelphia, is where the story begins. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you know that I have been on this journey to recreate King Thranduil's costume from The Hobbit in as screen accurate detail as possible. And for years, I have been trying and trying and trying and trying, and at this point, I've gotten to a place where I am actually kind of happy with it. It's not perfect, but we are at a point where I'm like, okay, I can't keep doing this. I need to move on. Let's go through the entire story of why this started and why it took so long. Why did this take 3 years? So this story does start back in 2020, right after C2E2 2020, which is the last convention I think that happened before everything just shut down, just died. This was the last con. I was back from that con with so much inspiration. I don't think you understand how hyped I was to start creating these huge costumes. I think I had just come back. I'd watched the Crown Championships of Cosplay. If you don't know what that is a huge cosplay contest. It's kind of like the World Championships of Cosplay in a way. There's a couple of internationals. That's one of the big ones, especially for people who don't do anime cosplay, which I don't usually do anime cosplay. And I come back from this crown inspired. I'm like, I'm gonna get on stage. I'm gonna do this. And so I start looking for costumes. I'm like, okay, what would be on the stage? What would look good, right? Mind you, I had at this point only been cosplaying, only been sewing for less than a year. So, one bad idea, I did not think this through. This is one of the reasons why it took so long, is because I was dumb. Two, I just, Thranduil's a hard costume, especially with the fabric and everything. So I, during spring break, make the decision to cosplay this boy. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. It doesn't look super difficult. My mistake. So I start looking for materials, and the first thing I encounter is all of the fabrics for Thranduil. All of these fabrics are fully custom woven for the Hobbit movies. They're fully custom woven for the Hobbit movies, meaning that I will never get my hands on screen accurate fabric. So what I had to do is I had to scour the internet. I had to start looking up keywords, but there's only really so many keywords you can search using the term silver, metallic, lurex, brocade, jacquard, gold. You get the same results, and all the results lead back to mood searches. Now, the mood fabrics brocades are the most accurate I've found for this character. I'm going to talk about materials, because I love materials, and the fabric is really important. Yeah, I think as the story is being told, the whole fabric thing will make more sense. But I'm going to start with the interlinings and sort of what's going on underneath. The lining is just going to be a really basic satin poly charmeuse that I got from Fabric Wholesale Direct. Love that place. But I want to talk about the inner lining today. So the inner lining today is, I'm not going to use canvas this time. So if you don't know, I've been using canvas for the past 4 of them. I used cotton for the last one, that was too light. I used a really nice linen for the first one, and that was actually really nice, but it was a little too heavy. So what I bought this poly linen. It's not perfect, but it's a really nice drape. And I think, for me, the goal of this costume, if you have never seen The Hobbit, you'll know, or you won't notice, but the costume drapes beautifully. It's one of the most beautifully draped costumes I've ever seen. So that means that it's heavy. And you know that brocade is not heavy. So they've definitely interlined it with something. So I'm going to try this linen, which is heavy, but it's also structured, because structure is another part of this project that I'm really going to play with this time. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of tailoring. I didn't realize how expensive tailoring canvas was, so I'm not going to use a lot of it for projects, but I did buy some of it just to play with it and see what it looks like before I start on a whole Dune escapade of tailoring lapels. But for now, we're gonna just use tailor's canvas to structure out the front, because my biggest complaint in a lot of these costumes is the way that the front is not structured, is the way the front just kind of collapses in on itself. No matter how much interlining, how much tailoring I do, it's just it's either gonna contour to your body, or it's going to be structured. And I did not want it to contour to my body, I want smooth. Okay, so that takes us to the big piece. I've got all my patterns. There's a dress form right there with the pattern that I just finished up. It's kind of it's interesting. I've not done this pattern for a while. I remade this pattern because the last one sucked. So let's do that. But behind me, I have one extra yardage. So in here, I have about 1.5 yards of this fabric. This is the main fabric I'm gonna make the robe out of. It's this springy, it's got a stretch, but it should not be stretched, sort of plis brocade. And this is the most screen accurate thing I've found so far, right? It's not perfectly screen accurate. We've been over this. The fabric is never going to be entirely screen accurate. I have hunted for literal years to find something, and this is the most screen accurate thing I have found so far. Obviously, it'd be even more screen accurate if it was in a pale gold, but I'm not gonna find that. Like, I can't be picky at this point if I've looked for so long. So this fabric is the fabric. I also have in this bin, I've been hoarding this since September of last year, just to let you know. Another 5 yards of this. And it came with a coupon that expired in October. So yeah, but here's another 5 yards. You're like, how did you pay for all this? Well, okay, back when Instagram paid you, I had a video go viral, and that's why I paid for this. So, you know, sometimes you get lucky. That's kind of how I do it. Mood has sales. Sometimes I get lucky, and I'll buy the fabric when I get lucky. That's kind of how it's always been. Or I take contest winnings. Though, yeah, so fabric. This is, I think, about 5 yards, and then the other one is 1.5 yards. So with this, I have about 6.5 yards, and this one's gonna go for the sleeves, the collar, and some of the smaller bits up front, and then this will be for the really long pieces in the back. Now, I don't want this to train super far. I'm not gonna ramble forever, but I do want to just be like, yeah, it's not gonna be like a 20-inch train. I'm gonna make maybe like a 10-inch train. The robe on top of this one trains like 24 or 25 inches behind me, so it's a very long train. So to save on fabric, I have decided that this is going to train maybe like 10 inches behind me, just not crazy long, which is what the original design trains. But it's gonna be hidden anyway, so it doesn't really matter, and it saves me like 10 inches of hand sewing. We'll get into all that. Fabric. I have scoured every single website you can scour, and those were the most accurate. Though when I first saw them 2-3 years ago, they were very expensive, so I did not, at the time, buy them. I was just sad. So I went back to Philadelphia. I go to their fabric district, and I buy, like, you know, an overlay and, like, a little brocade. I was like, oh, okay, this is gonna be good. No. This one was bad. So the overlay and the brocade turned out bad. The pattern turned out like trash. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like, this whole first robe was garbage. And that's fine, because I was, what, not even a year into sewing, and I was trying to do something that is basically full tailoring and structural pieces and pattern making, and you're like, that doesn't happen when you first start sewing. So I did it, and it was very exciting. My dog wants out. I am terrified. I am shaking in my boots right now, but here we are. We're about to do this for the 9th time. I think I have like number 4 documented on actual YouTube, so we'll see how this one differs. New pattern, that's for sure, because I figured out all the flaws with the pattern. Not all the flaws. I'm a chaos patterner, which is not great for this project. So not only was this structurally bad, I tried to paint it with like fabric paints, and then it turned out horrible. That was awful. Bad idea. Don't. We're gonna let that one just be a thing. And so the first thing when I looked at was, this sucks. Now, I'm glad I recognized that it was not good, but it also sent me into a spiral of obsession. That night I started scouring the internet, but, you know, obviously at this point, the world was done. There was absolutely nothing. Getting into a fabric store that wasn't Joann's was impossible, so I had to go and scour the Joann's. And I found fabric that was actually decent for me at the time, and honestly, I'm so glad I never bought the expensive fabric until I knew what I was doing, because There's no way. I would have been so sad because that's like a lot of money on fabric that just failed. Second robe, bad. Did not interface it at all. The panels, usually the panels are like almost vertical. They're like here. These panels were horizontal. And you know, it doesn't look that good when your panels go horizontal instead of vertical. So that was fun. And so panel number 2, robe number 2, has now been stripped for parts. Stripped that one for parts for robe number 3. Now, robe number 3 is where I started learning about stuff. I started learning about inner linings and interfacings and how to structure things in a way. So I bought some linen to go on the inside of this one because I started doing research on what they used in the films, right? Other than custom made stuff, and I read the word linen. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do linen, right? It actually worked out fine. This rope is actually decent, other than the fact that I didn't finish any seams inside of it, meaning that under the lining, it's all fraying, and that sucks, because there are like little holes and things that are peeling up. And, you know, this robe is completely fine for wear. It's a little messy, but hey, what are you gonna do? It's your third attempt on a robe. So yeah, now we are leaning into a month on this project. I did like other stuff for it. I made like my first crown. I tried boot covers, which didn't work out. The first crown was ugly. I didn't fit it to my head, or I didn't fit it to my head with a wig, so all it does is fall down. I fit it to like a mannequin head, so yeah, fit your crowns to the wig that you're wearing, not to a mannequin head. Thank you. Yeah, so then that one was a thing, and I was like, okay, I'm satisfied. But I wasn't satisfied because I wanted the gold robes. I didn't want the silver robes. The silver robe is what I call the red robe with the velvet. That was another one that I want to make, and I want to make that one again with like actual Devoray, like burnout velvet, make the velvet. That's an aside. Velvet is expensive, especially silk velvet, because that's what I need. We get back into this thing, so I'm about to go home. I'm about to go crazy, like literally insane by staying in Philly. So I was like, I need to get out of here. I need to go home. Me being sad goes to the Joann's one last time, comes across this gold silver metallic cotton poplin. Now this is actually a really nice like shifting fabric. I had like 8 yards of tulle that I'd bought for a different robe. Every time I start this costume, like a new robe, I'm like, oh yeah, it'll not take much time, though. Okay, hear me out. I am very distracted right now because 1, I'm hyperfixating on a band. 2, I also am trying to finish up Emperor Paul Atreides because I am desperate for new cosplay content. I've done nothing since the first of this month, where I was also remaking a costume. I think the whole thing of this year has just been remakes, but you know. But then I start this costume, and like I first sit at the machine for 6 hours to get just the front panels done, not the back panels. That's what I'm doing right now. Just the front panels done. Just the front, on a machine, like a sewing machine. And you know, usually a sewing machine does not take 50 million years. Like, it's fine. This is, I always forget how labor intensive this is, because half the time is not me actually sitting at the machine and sewing panels. It's only 30 panels. It's doing the basting, but the thing is that, yeah, I could pin it. You could pin it, but what that's going to do is that the panels slide, and then it also doesn't mark out the piping to the piece, and I'd rather have it be extremely accurate because, hey, again, there's so many curves on this thing. Like, getting the curves pinned and lined up properly just takes so much time. So I'm lamenting right now because, 1, this costume is technically due in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, pretty much. Basically, I'm going insane because I'm like, I want to get the other costume done. I also am working on a jacket for, you know, the band, because I get when I get hyperfixated, especially on music, it turns it into making fashion items out of it. Now, that's going to be documented in a short video instead of a long one. But basically, I've got 4 projects going on. I'm trying to force myself to get this one done because it's the one that needs to be done fastest, and I also bought a whole bunch of stuff to remake other parts of it. I'm having a moment. I think the moment's okay. I'm fine. Everything's fine, you know. The robes actually stopped for a while. I made the outer red velvet robe, so like the really fancy one, but instead of like burning out with like the chemical burnout, I literally burned it out with a heat tool. Because I had polyester velvet. Now that robe is currently fraying so horribly, and I'm very sad because it was actually really nice. But it was tragically finished, which at this point in time. It's kind of what you'd expect. Everything took a back burner. I made a Legolas costume. At this point, it's full obsession, like July of 2020, which is just, it was such a sad moment in time for, I think, a lot of people, which is completely acceptable. So I was just sad. So I, decided to instead start working on what I call an elven wardrobe, which I just really wanted to make clothing at that point that looked like elf clothing. And I did. I made a lot of it, and I still wear it in the winter sometimes because it's really fun, but it's kind of not something I can wear in the summer, so I do what I call elven adjacent now, but that's an aside. When we get back into Thranduil, what happens is one day I buy swatches. I buy swatches for this project. Just casually on mood, I was like, all right, we're gonna buy 4 swatches. The problem is having those swatches in your hands makes you so angry because you're like, okay, now I have to make this robe. I have to buy the expensive fabric. So I caved. They had a sale. They had a 20% off sale. Mood 20% off sales are my blessing, and that's how I got all this fabric. Bought so much fabric. I think this first one was just the really expensive brocade for the inside robe. I did all the fancy stuff. I made a mock-up. I fit the mock-up. That was one of the mistakes that I did in the beginning, was I did not fit the mock-up. I then also made sure everything is perfect. The only thing, I have no gripes about this robe, actually. It turned out fine other than the collar, I think, is a little too chunky, and then there's a little bit of a lining thing, but these are both things that can be fixed so easily. So, I have literally no complaints about this robe, and I still wear it. So, that's fun. The zipper's kind of broken at the bottom. That's my fault. But obviously I wasn't satisfied enough because for some reason it wasn't perfect at the time. And so I looked at it again and was like, no, wider, longer. So I had a weird obsession with the width of the garment because you can tell in the back that there's this huge pleat of fabric. So he's got this very, very long, very large train. Again, I was obsessed with this train before I realized that the long outer robe that I made just covered it up. So before going back to Philadelphia, I ordered new outer robe fabric, so the really long coat blanket robe, and then also inner robe fabric. And I bought the special fabric for myself. I bought the one that I originally saw that I was like, that's the fabric, that's the exact fabric that I like. I bought both of them. I didn't start making up the robe number, 7? Until, or robe number 6. Until November, and I started making those up. I started using the same pattern as the last one. This pattern was fine for the time, but I actually was missing a front panel, so there was a little bit of discrepancy in which front panels go where and how they're lined up. There's actually 12 panels instead of 9. At the time I thought there were 9 panels. Okay, so I started the pad stitching, so I'm basically pad stitching the entire inside with some canvas here. And I'm just gonna be honest with you, I'm only halfway done. Look at the way that lays compared to the other side. It's actually insane, right? So that's one side, right? Then that's the other side. Do you see the difference? This is literally, I love doing this interfacing part of it because it just begins to structure everything. Now, the shoulder pads aren't in yet, but those will raise this up even more and make it super structured. It's so cool. So I'm currently structuring everything, and I think I know what I did wrong on the last 7 robes. Number 8, I'd actually interfaced it later. It's the structuring on the inside. I, for so long, was trying to cut so many corners because there's this thing in cosplay where you just want the costume done as fast as possible, and sometimes you shouldn't be doing that because obviously when you cut corners, things don't turn out as good, and then you have to make it 8 more times, meaning that you're wasting 3 years on a costume. So as I'm pad stitching this, as I'm looking at it and putting on my form and taking it back to me, I'm realizing what may have gone wrong, and it's just that there wasn't enough structure on the inside of the garment, because when you look at the actual robe, some parts of it are really flowy, and then other parts of it, on the chest, are super structured, and you can tell there's stuff in there, because obviously brocade will not do this thing on its own. I guess back when I was still learning how to sew, just interfacing something, interlining this with something, felt like it was enough, because that was it. But now the strain, what's happening is that also the strain of the seams, right? So when you're using and zipping up a garment that is meant to contour to your body, you're straining seams, right? So what I'm learning is that this is helping the seams not be strained, because what I'm pulling on now when I close this thing is the inner lining, the tailor's canvas. So I'm going to play around with some more structuring stuff. I think I'm on a path of this is what was missing. This is what's going to make this costume look about 50 times better, is the tough stuff of pad stitching. But hello. So, okay, I have sewn up a lining. So, okay, I didn't film the rest of the stitching, the pad stitching. I filmed a little bit of pad stitching, and then I just kind of was like doing it, and I forgot that it existed. So I'm going to show in a second sort of all of the pad stitching monstrosities I have done. It worked out beautifully. It looks really nice, and so I'm very happy that I decided to do it. But I also sewed up my lining here, which is just satin charmeuse from Fabric Wholesale Direct, and in the next couple of minutes, I will be pinning the fabric lining into the fabric itself, and that feels mildly insane. I can't actually sew it yet. I have to buy curtain weights so I can weight the bottom. I'll show you in a second, right? But so we get back to Philly. It's November now, somehow. I find a whole bunch of crazy stuff. I do a whole bunch of, like, crazy regular costuming stuff. I make a Zuko costume, right? All this fun stuff. I start working on this costume. I bring it home for the holidays, and fitting these costumes sucked. I remember fitting this thing and having to spend 3 days, like, taking it in, because I forgot to fit the mock-ups. I said I fit the mock-up. I fit the mock-up very poorly. But this one worked out fine. This is actually the last one I did for quite a while. Actually, I think until 2022. So I take this one to my first convention back after, like, everything shut down. I go back to my first con. This is my first, like, full real cosplay competition. So I compete. I play second in Journeyman, which I entered as novice, so I got bumped up. So that was really exciting, but also terrifying. So I did that. And then this robe is the one that goes all the way to C2E2. So C2E2 2021 had that weird off adjacent contest to crown. It wasn't crown, but it was like an adjacent contest of the same difficulty. I entered it into that just to be like, hey, haha, what if I did this? And I made it in, so that was exciting. And holy crap, that was an exciting experience. And I did the exact thing that I set out to do. And I was satisfied for a while. I moved on to Loki. I started working on a whole bunch of Lokis. But what I said basically was, if a more accurate fabric comes along, I will remake this robe. And you know where this leads, right? A more accurate fabric came along. So I remade this robe. I used the same pattern as the last time, because at that point I was like, alright, we already got a pattern. And it did not turn out great. This robe it wasn't tragic. I wore it to a few conventions, but it wasn't great. I just remember the process being overall misery, and I just really wasn't happy with it. Something that I've always had a gripe with is the length. I never made it long enough, so that was always fun. And I cut it too short, and it was like at the ankles instead of like all the way down underneath the feet. So that's something that I've looked at a lot. But this robe it's not a bad robe. Again, I think the thing with all these robes, and I know exactly what was missing in all of them now, we'll get to that. But I wore it, and it was fine. And I still don't know what to do with them, because I have all these robes now, and I want to sell them, but they're also living robes. Like, they are going to, like, destroy themselves a little bit each time you wear them, just because I do a lot of hand stitching and a lot of handwork. But that aside, then we enter the era of Thranduil original design era. I do that robe, and the Thranduil original design era is also me working on a new pattern to maybe perhaps one day, haha, what if, make a real screen accurate robe again. We enter this era. Mood has a sale. I have money at the time, because I think, so at the time I had enough money. Mood had a sale. So I said, okay, I'm going to try one more time with this fabric. So I bought more of the really screen accurate, like, wood grain brocade fabric. It was absolutely amazing. It's good fabric. It has give. It doesn't have stretch, but it gives. So that makes it really hard to work with. So that's not fun. But the mood brocade, it worked out fine. So it's been sitting in my basement for a very long time, because obviously the last 9 months have been spent on Thranduil's original design. And so for those 9 months, it was sitting there because I was like, okay, we're going to spend a week, we're going to do this. Deadlines kept coming. I was like, okay, crap, I can't do it. So 2 weeks ago, I was finishing up Apollo Atreides, and I finally picked it up. The great part is that I have a pattern already ready, because the pattern that I used for the 6-paneled robe for the original design actually was really well fitted. So what I did was I used the second side of that, mocked up the 12-panel front, this time doing 4 small panels, and then the rest of them being big panels. But there's 4 instead of 3. And so what I did, this robe, the thing that changed, the thing that made this specific robe work versus the others, is the fact that I added tailoring into this robe. So tailoring is the huge answer. This shaping on this thing, I'm so proud of the shaping. The rest of the robe, it turned out decent. I'm not going to say it's perfect. I'm not going to say it's great. It's good. But the tailoring on this robe is very well done, in my opinion. It was a very exciting moment to watch it come together. And I think that's what's been missing. Okay, hello. I finished lining everything after unpicking things about 4 times. If you know, you know, I'm incompetent at lining things properly the first time. Usually it takes me like 3 or 4 tries. So I unpicked that 4 times, did the sleeves, unpicked that, did the bottom, added a whole bunch of weights into the hem. It's been a whole experience, but we are now onto the collar. So I drafted a collar last night in a chaos method of drafting. I have these like 4 layers of interfacing and like linen and lining layers in here, ready to be sewn with piping and everything. So we're gonna get a collar in, and then all I have to do for the coat is put a zipper into it. Zippers are the actual worst, but they are the best method for closing this coat that I have found so far. Every other method has not worked. Hooks and eyes didn't work. Hook and eye tape didn't work. Like, buttons don't work. It's a zipper. Zipper is the best, smoothest way to close this thing. So, but zippers suck. So here we are, doing a collar and a zip, and I think that's going to take us to the end of the coat. And then I have to work on the boots, because I unpicked and completely tore apart those boots to make them out of real leather, make them look nicer. So that's all that. Here we are. We're getting really close. But my biggest gripe with all of them is the way that it always shaped at the end, the way that it always felt. It felt unfinished. And this one has a finishing and a finesse that I'm very proud of. So, lesson learned. Don't skip interfacing, as I've continued to learn. But now we come to this point of the project. And it's kind of a wild experience to recount this crazy story. It's because I've been doing this for so long. I've been working on the same costume for 3 years. To finally be done, obviously putting that in quotation marks, because what I've said my whole time is if a more accurate fabric comes along, I have the pattern, I can just make another robe. So that's fun. At this point, the only thing that would actually persuade me to do another one is if I got my hands on the screen accurate fabric, which is never happening because that was 10 years ago and it was custom made specifically for the film. So RIP screen accurate fabric, or they got it somewhere in London, because you never know, those brocades are crazy. But we are now here. We are now at the end of this project for the time being. Not the very end. I know that there's more that I want to do with Thranduil the character and more of his costumes, but for the gold robes, the ones we see in the throne room scene specifically, I am done for now. I cannot look at another brocade. Okay, hello. So I'm taking a break from the sewing machine because guess who just finished the robe? Now, I didn't film this last day because the last day was just a lot of yelling, and I didn't want to subject anybody to the fact that I'm yelling in a sewing machine for a few hours, because I had to put on a collar, and then I had to put on a zipper, and then I had to unpick everything all the way down to the bone so I could fix a panel, just to redo everything again. So basically, I just did not want to film that because it would not be a pretty thing. It would be a pretty ugly sewing thing, because if you don't know, sewing can get pretty angry. Yes, it looks calming and relaxing until you're putting on a zipper and a collar. So, I'm taking a break now. The robe is now done. I'm pretty happy with it. It's not perfect, but I think at this point, I can't settle for perfect because we saw where that took me. Right, perfection is unattainable at the moment, so I'm gonna wait. Maybe in the future, if I find more accurate fabric, I'll try again, but for the most part, this is the most accurate fabric I have found so far. So here we are. I'm currently painting. I'm currently painting a staff that I made 2 years ago, completely stripped out, remade with Warbler last year, and am now just making sure it has a really nice metallic sheen and it's clean before I take it into a competition. And then I'll work on the boots. The boots are almost done too. I got all the saddle stitching done yesterday, so I just have to attach the saddle stitching to the boot base. The boot base, I'm just talking a lot now. The boot base is the same as the one that I've been using for 3 years. I just stripped out the pleather and used real leather with like some inside stitching. And I'm just using saddle stitches to attach it. But yeah, we have made a lot of progress, which I didn't think I'd get this far this soon. So that's really exciting because that means I can start on my next costume sooner than expected, which is the first costume that I have not actually planned out for a year. All these last few costumes I've been planning out since last year because obviously they should have gotten done last year while Thranduil was getting done, but obviously that one took 9 months. The other you're like, oh, aren't you working on one now? Yes, but my original design took me 9 months. This one only took me a week, but I also have a lot of it hoarded. We'll go through the whole thing when I actually like talk about it on the stories. Hopefully you're hearing the story of this costume and the absolute insanity that is this literal journey. But I think we've come to the end for the time being. Notice how I literally physically find it impossible to move on. Yeah. And another thing of piping. I am done. But I think the thing with this project, the thing that really makes me very excited about it and makes me very excited about how far it's come is the way that I've learned things through it. I didn't start this project knowing anything. I started knowing nothing, and I just kept persevering into the sphere of learning new things until it worked out to the point where, you know, obviously I'm learning how to pad stitch and I'm learning how to do all this stuff, and it kind of feels crazy, but it also doesn't feel crazy, and I'm very excited to share that end result with you. Now, the only reason that this got done is because I signed up for a competition deadline. So that's fun. That's next week, but I did sign up for a competition because I needed a deadline to get this done, otherwise this would never get done. So I hope this little story interlude was interesting in the concept of Thranduil. I hope this story is still interesting. The actual documentation of, I think, the first fancy robe is on this YouTube channel, because I tried uploading a couple of videos years ago. So documentation is on there. It's kind of really cool. I think it's cool. It's interesting to see how the method has changed. It stayed the same. But that aside, we are now ready to see the current final work. It's not perfect. I know it's not perfect. I've got a lot of things that I want to add, and there's a couple of things that I still have to do to finish this piece. But as a costume itself, it is the most happy I've been with this piece, I think, for a very long time. So I'm very, very happy with the way that this turned out. Part of it is the fabric, I guess. But yeah, so very excited in this venture in tailoring. For the next build, it's going to be very different. If you want to watch me make an armor build, like a full suit of armor build for the first time in my life, stick around. I'm going to try and attempt to make an entire armor build based on a band this time. So it's totally different, totally new, but there will be stories to tell, and I'm very excited to tell those stories because I think I like the storytelling aspect of this thing because one, this one was just a fun story. Two, the next one's also a fun story. And then we go into the Dune universe for a while, but very happy. Subscribe if you want to continue sticking around for more. I'm very excited to upload more of these. They're very happy. They're very exciting to me. I'm going to go brush this wig out again, get all this off, and go sweat.